Thank you, everyone. Like I said, I'm Liz Mazzell, along with Lisa Thompson. We're the co-chairs of Annie's research work group, and it's so nice to have such new faces here today because actually, probably the research work group is one of the smaller components of Annie, just because research is a small component of nursing, right? The number of PhD prepared nurses is going down when many of the advanced degrees are actually going up. Um, so definitely still an important component, of course, to nursing and to environmental health research. It is the research component. So I'm excited to have everyone here, and feel free to explore some of our other work groups as well. Education, practice. It's a really big group, and Annie's getting bigger. So still welcome. Um, we will be offering CEs for this talk today, and we'll get all that information out to you if you're interested in the CEs. And we'll also record and share. Once we get that recording up, we'll share it with everyone. And yeah, next month, and I think the next maybe 4 months, we already have great speakers planned. So we'll be announcing those as we go. But our January speaker to kick off 2024 is Steve Cairns. I did get a little messed up. Okay. And he is up there in Canada. I have to say that since I'm down here in North Carolina. But Nipissing University. Yeah, he's an assistant professor there at the School of Nursing. And he is a fresh Dr. Cairns, fresh. So congratulations to you. And yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. And he's going to share with us his dissertation, his focus at ethnography. And of course, we are all very excited to hear about this because it's about planetary health and the nurses that are involved with that. So unless anyone has any questions, I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Liz. And just if you could enable sharing, you make me a potential host there. And I see it now. Share my screen. This is very special. As special as graduating, to come back and to see just the people that this research is associated with. And I'm calling in from a special place up in Canada. So right there is the dot. Call that Bracebridge, Ontario, Lake Muskoka area, and also, a claim of unceded territory amongst the Anishinaabe people. And, the traditional hunting territory of this land is really been an amazing awareness for myself in terms of looking back at the history of where I've been living and really respecting and trying to interpret that experience for me to be here, and also as part of reconciling the reality of working and living in spaces that have been forcibly taken by people like my generations. And so that being said, it's also a special opportunity to connect to new ways forward, and with that appreciation of space and location. And that's something I really noticed in my research and meeting with Canadians, particularly nursing environmental interest groups, acknowledging the land as part of beginning the process of a discussion. And I thought that would be really helpful here today. So just, this is a research forum, so I've really sort of focused this presentation in a research format. So sharing the outline basically of my dissertation, but with some pieces in between. So the background being something I think you're all familiar with, and that's why you're here. There's something that is being clear, that nurses are being called to actively participate. And so there is a significance in the work that you do. It's the fact that you're nurses and you're connected to community And that is a unique position for our profession and for any profession. So this idea of if not us, then who relates to nurses locally, regionally, globally, being on the front lines of these issues, and that position having an impact in the populations that nurses serve. So the purpose of this research is to say, okay, who are nurses who are actually responding to planetary health challenges? And what might those implications be for nursing education, research, practice, and policy? And so part of this background, my studies in qualitative sort of interpretive research from a broad lens, using a focused ethnography and really grounding myself in sort of a reflective practice of where am I coming from and towards this work. And so as I had a lovely introduction earlier with Rachel, who described, yeah, just where does nursing fit in this space? And for me, I was a camper at heart. I grew up, trying to, be outside most of the time. And I would say that was something consistent amongst participants. As a nurse, there was a stark contrast coming to practice and seeing how much waste I was participating in on a regular basis, and pollution. And one of the projects I worked on as a nursing student, this is shared here from the Canadian Nursing Students Association, was trying to do similar to the work of Kate, like, putting things together, resources that might help inform. And, gee, maybe had I read the work of Keffel in 1991, it might have changed the trajectory of my nursing career. But I didn't really dive into literature at that stage of my life. I moved to Texas. I was a nurse in Odessa, Texas, at the Women's and Children's Hospital there. There was no work in Canada at the time. And so I was a neonatal intensive care nurse and sort of living the life. I think someone else mentioned a bit of travel nursing in their career. And so moving to places and exploring the country is an incredible part of what nursing is capable of. And yeah, my career sort of went in a dual way. I went back into education and started working for Outward Bound Canada. I taught grade 4 in BC amongst the Celtic First Nation of British Columbia, and just an incredible part of the world and country to be in. And my family's been back there at various times, but I have moved to Bracebridge, Ontario for the last 25 years. And basically, yeah, tried to, think about nursing, but it's also like sort of the environment was never really the focus of my career. And so, having this opportunity to do a PhD, it was a real important opportunity to bring together those two interests and to really look for, okay, who is practicing nursing in this way? Because I'm not claiming to be to the extent to which I would hope or understand, involved as a nurse in planetary health. But I wanted to know the nurses who are doing it. And so that was the background to this research. From a theoretical perspective, I've really enjoyed the work of Dr. Jean Watson and the work of human caring and how that was translated and built upon in terms of critical caring from Adele Falk-Raphael, who's a faculty member of York University. And this sort of model for nursing practice is really embedding this idea of critical caring in how nurses are, right? The ontology of our work, how we interpret knowledge and make choices ethically around how praxis unfolds. And so it's a very positive model that I found useful in terms of providing a lens through which I would explore this topic. And so my research questions are sort of threefold. The first one being, how are nurses experiencing planetary health as a journey or approach? What activities they do and what priorities for action? And when I formed this question, it was looking at decline as a crisis facing humanity. And in what ways do or can nurses embody their participation within organizations such as Annie that are focused on issues of planetary decline. And how do participants view themselves as nurses and the work of planetary health within arts-informed participant self-reflection? So these questions, well, actually, I'm a slide ahead. I'll just buzz up to it there. These questions, and you'll see this in my dissertation, helped inform sort of my literature search strategy in terms of taking concepts from the questions and then using those within the databases that are available. And I found that a really useful structure for making the questions actually built upon for the literature review. And just to go back, the literature review was sort of an interpretive process. I used Navivo as the basis for my data collection, and basically was reading articles and pulling data points out, and then had quite a bit of information to sort of pull together what I would say emergent themes in the data around this topic area. And so, yeah, these issues of challenging impacts, downstream context. I won't go into huge detail here, but these are all really powerful learning for me, entering into this conversation through scholarship, and to realize the breadth of work that nurses have been engaged actively in this topic area. And, also identifying what I would say gaps in the literature, specifically that a lot of times nurses are describing like really in poignant ways, but a fragmented call for action. It's like, yeah, we have to be there, but there's really no like application or really defined expression as much about nurses doing the work. And yeah, the research around actual nursing interventions being a bit of a gap, and significance of personal and professional preparedness for nurses. We're really moving into a time of adaptation. And, COVID, we've gone through some pretty significant global health crisis that nurses are, I would say this is starting to come into focus. But there is a lack of that awareness of preparedness and also to respond to the anticipated challenges. So just listed above are some of the incredible authors that I found very informative. Like I said, if I'd read Keffel in my undergrad, it would have been profound. Dillard Wright, another person I really want to highlight for really articulating and deconstructing nurses for the times that we're facing. So in terms of methodology, I've mentioned a focused ethnography. And so as a nurse coming into a topic area amongst people who are engaged in that area, there was a reciprocal acknowledgement of that professional work and history. So a focused ethnography was such a great opportunity to use online too, where I could have focused research questions that I was trying to interpret and engage people in those spaces right through North America. And so this consisted of semi-structured interviews, participant observations, and arts-informed participant self-reflections. And so, just trying to, for my own mind, sort out how this influences the focus, really keeping research participants close to the center of the work, as well as my committee and environmental organizations, particularly in nursing. And so the idea is here, what are patterns that can emerge from the data, and particularly among nurses who are engaged in this space while they're informed of the impending challenges of health concerns associated with climate change in particular. And so knowledge translation also being wanting something to be emphasized in my methodology. And so today is sort of that celebration for me. So just to give you some background around these interviews, again, those 4 topic areas, right? Journey, approaches, activities, and priorities that really helped me focus in on what is the work of nurses in this space. And I had an amazing response, even in the midst of the pandemic, of nurses who stepped forward to, an open call to say, hey, if you're engaged in the environmental issues, I'd like to hear from you. And through the process, 14 nurses were interested in carrying on. And these are pseudonym names, but generally these areas of questioning and using this idea of focused ethnography helped me tune in fairly short order conversations that asked important questions here. And I won't go in those to make detail, but again, it's all presented within the dissertation. The observations was another important aspect, and I was able to attend
Hey,
six.
Nana.
Oh, sorry. It's okay, Sarah. Um, Six observational meetings, and uniquely, at the national level, at the regional level, and at local levels. And so that, was another context in which I was trying to interpret the experience of nurses. And so, how are they communicating in spaces like this? How do they relate to each other? And I'm really talking about you. What's the social context of these kinds of meetings? How do you create and understand power and barriers, or what prevents people from joining and such? What are the roles people take on? How are decisions made, and what's the focus, and how do members contribute? So that was a really healthy and important lens to look at. And so the third area of data collection involved arts-informed participant self-reflections. And so 5 participants decided to participate in that way. And I mean, I'm not particularly artistic, but I was just amazed at the contributions that these 5 individuals made. And in terms of poetry, in terms of photography, collage, and is one example of poetry, including body art, as just that embodiment of the expressed intent to care and be in connection, not outside of nature. And that was very important. This, I'd like to draw attention to Charlie's work here, which is a collage of climate concerned issues associated with housing crisis in their region. And on the backside of this poster is the political campaign advertisement of a local councillor who actually won that area and was campaigning against housing people who are facing issues associated with climate issues. And so, these were in the garbage, and this individual took that from the garbage and used it to express their heart concern around, on the juxtaposition of that issue, and very poignantly describing, well, where are we going to support the people that are going to continue to be affected by the climate, and so yeah, this blew me away. And when you try to take 3 different data collection points and integrate that, I used sort of an interpretive analysis approach, and moving from sort of the macro to the micro, and back and forth, and try to with Navivo beautifully was able to hold like a million sticky notes within the computer space, and put them into sort of focuses or subcategories of codes, and then draw upon categories of codes which informed sub themes and themes. And so tracing that sort of data points right through has been a strength of this in terms of evidence-based qualitative research. And I'd be happy to talk more about that. But this map is just sort of not meant to frighten anyone, but to say there's a broad sort of categories of codes, and how that was informed, and also informed some art, which I'll be exploring a little bit later. So moving into the themes, specifically important within the journey of nurses, was this challenge of facing a contradictory paradigm. So sort of how nurses are trying to reclaim or confront or examine sort of the socially constructed ways of working in the world while trying to also, make a living. And so sort of wanting to be within nature and not separate from it. And just, as we are in anthropocentrism, it's just pervasive. And so as I've done, and I think others struggle with that idea of how does it fit in nursing, right? Many of the nurses are working very hard at caring for people, but they really want to get back to, um, hands on earth activities and things where they're able to have an outlet and balance that out for them. And so reclaiming the sense of belonging within nature. Many participants called me out on my research questions that sort of emphasized this issue of decline. That's not really where I found participants to be at. They were interested in understanding what they can do within the space and just trying to be that, you know, trying to do their best within their positions of privilege that they have access to, particularly as nurses. They felt that that was a particularly important call to be involved. And so working in that, challenging that was sort of an unpacking of oneself in something that I would say as nurses in that journey. It's an ongoing process. And in terms of approaches, I found fascinating just the diversity of engagements that nurses are involved in, and trying to shape this around sort of an awakening often that occurred, where at some point in someone's career or experience, it's like we don't do something, there's going to be some pretty incredible problems we're facing, and so coming towards that work was a bit of an awakening, and described to me rather than emphasizing the imperatives and the challenges, uh, being functional, right? Like moving forward, getting involved, connecting and building community, taking from these opportunities of engagement good energy, right? We don't want to sit around and talk about doomsday. I don't want to be Dr. Doom. And that shift in my conversation was a huge inspiration and influence on how I started to look at this work, and that in that space, broadening nursing practice beyond what we would define as a traditional clinical space, where food security stood out as a strong activity which was redefining nurses, and these nurses not waiting for that practice concern, actually putting that into the College of Nurses of Ontario when it seemed to fit with defining the kind of work that they're involved in. And yeah, just moving away from maybe traditional forms of economy and participating. And I would say, similar to the idea of parish nursing, where the connection to community being much more of a centered approach, rather than, thinking that the system is going to be sustainable in a way that it's going to maybe, and if we don't build these structures within our communities, that's the real vulnerability that was being understood amongst these people. So activities is another important space that I'm sure, I hope resonates with you here, of Annie, and this idea of barriers to engagement and trying to interpret as nurses, how do we enter and how do we maintain energy and how do we do this work? And it was described to me sort of how participants take calculated risk and are protecting themselves and others while also leading from the heart. And so what that means is that nurses are understanding that there are some challenges having discussions. You mentioned climate change in parts of America, and the conversation is shut down. And those nurses were able to describe that experience of knowing that that was going to happen and finding ways around it, finding common ground, de-escalating the polarization that we see in other political processes, and through story and conversation and care, reconnect on fundamental basis that our health, human health, nature's health, is planetary health. And at that simplest form was an empowering beginning to those kinds of conversations where someone might have felt opposition from the beginning. And nurses taking pride in that, not participating in the reciprocal violence of sort of destructive, polarized conversations. And so the fourth theme was looking at the priorities, and these nurses are happening, right? You guys are happening. You're doing things. You're trying to shout out about that, and leveraging this as superpower. That nurses are finding that you might not be a climate scientist, and you might not need to go and get a degree in that area, but health. And so, if that connection between human health and planetary health is made, that superpower empowers nurses such as yourselves to go and enter spaces where traditionally maybe a nurse hasn't spoken of, and getting into educational environments, blogging, schools, and boy, it's really happening amongst retirees. They're not held back by these barriers of professional people trying to work in work, and that's just phenomenal. And so finding this voice is the call, right? Seeing it, finding it, and embracing it. And so, yeah, these four themes have been used also, and as I've been inspired by art, to start to think about some metaphor images. And so this first metaphor image is of bare feet is this idea, and this is again the sort of the macro, sort of taking all this data and trying to express it in a way that might relate to people. So being grounded by time and space where participants felt particularly close to nature at a young age. And sort of while walking lightly on the earth, this image also includes a sharp tin can, which symbolizes the obvious contradictions the participants experience while navigating their journey. Sort of the black and white image also is aimed to raise questions about what nurses or who nurses are engaging with in planetary health, and what journey perspectives might be missing from a diverse community of nurses. And this metaphor also aims to express the vulnerability and the challenge among participants to live what they value while also confronting the obvious planetary health concerns within an anthropocentric society. The next sort of metaphor image is this idea of trees, and these four trees aim to reflect the interrelated functionality of different seasons, sort of spring representing that awakening, the importance of focusing on the root of issues, the nourishing of understanding from there, building community and broadening what's possible. I would describe as fitting for the summer tree, where it points its leaves in the most efficient direction. And harvesting good energy and sustaining oneself is like the fall tree bearing fruit. And that's this slide here. Oh, no, that's not that one yet. And then the winter tree is the one that's, might appear dormant, but it's taking stock of its resources. It's letting go of dead branches and conserving energy to recharge its roots. That was particularly evident after COP26 in meeting with an environmental interest group that really was disappointed with those results and the action items that were drawn from it. And it was mentioned, but it was like, okay, how do we get moving forward on this? What are the actions items? How do we express that we were there at that meeting? And it was like, didn't even miss a beat, right? Taking stock, letting go, and moving forward, not letting that become a barrier that would inhibit further participation. This image of a turtle shell, I guess, is to represent that participant's strength. and vulnerability, as well as boldness towards planetary health challenges. And one participant in the discussions I had described sort of a warrior stance in the midst of the challenges of trying to have a voice at certain tables as a nurse. And, and reflection of this, I at no time in any of my conversations or data points noticed any examples of violence expressed in any form. And so this, would be contrary to the shield of a warrior. The shell represents a protective measure without an expression of reciprocal violence. And I would say that's particularly unique to nursing, which I'm just really happy about. And the Earth, right, as viewed from space, representing the clarity in which the participants saw planetary health as fundamental to the existence of life. And so this singular image, right, helps us see that, maybe understanding that human health as planetary health could be a unifying social message communicated by nurses around the globe. So in terms of implications in practice, again, I don't want to spend too much time, as I'd love to open this up for questions. But in terms of trying to take this data and pull it into certain areas, which might be, again, functional, right? How does this relate to practice, policy, education, and research? And so, these bullet points are attempting to try to pull that out of the dissertation. And if these areas of our interest to you in particular, I really do hope you'll have a chance to review it. But this, again, aims to be practical for the urgency of the mitigation and adaptation issues that we're facing. Policies relating to planetary health need to be prioritized around regulatory decisions that emphasize that in every aspect of health systems. And education, planetary health frameworks, particularly the planetary health education framework, is just a great example of interprofessional development and nurses being at the table of that work, where we're putting into a lens where people can interpret all these issues within an overarching perception to bring into focus, which is so complex. But it's again making these messages tangible and accessible. And so, in terms of research, studies are needed to further interpret nurses from much more diverse perspectives, including Indigenous nurses, Black nurses, gender diverse nurses, just to name a few. And this is to support our knowledge and understanding of how planetary health can be represented among nurses from across cultures and through different ways of knowing. So in terms of limitations, there's an inherent bias in my perspective as an investigator. I'm a middle class white male with relatively little direct personal experience in the adversity of climate change or environmental injustices. And so nurses who are experiencing marginalization or environmental injustice, they'd have a very different perspective and would guide inquiries differently and that lived experience. Not to say it discredits this work, but it's to say there's other ways of interpretation which would be valuable for further research. And this study was based on convenience sampling of participants responding to a flyer. So I was not targeting particular diverse groups, which I would like to do in subsequent research, particularly because during COVID it was quite difficult. And, if you're going to engage with people who might not have come forward, you want to be ready. You want to have really important support and knowledge of those communities in ways that would be effective. I know from my experience living in BC, you don't just walk into Indigenous community, right? It takes time to build those relationships respectfully. And I would look forward to that for future opportunities. And so indicating that that's something that's missing here is that while nurses often would find knowledge opportunities by engaging in educational experiences and local populations within this research itself, it did not include an Indigenous perspective, and I'm not attempting to claim that. What I would say is that um, there's a lot of important groundwork in the sort of the themes and identified findings that would help nurses prepare themselves to engage those conversations. Um, I'm not in the wording emphasizing things like decolonization, indigenization, but they are here. Those things are within. And so there's been a purposeful use amongst participants not to use language that would be polarizing. And so again, not trying to focus this work on a particular interest group, right? That's one of our challenges, is that coming here is awesome. It's an incubator for what's possible. But we need to break these conversations down into a much broader audience within our profession, and looking for ways of doing that. And the fourth issue of limitations I wanted to draw your attention to is that I didn't differentiate in my findings the difference between activities, engagements, advocacy, and activism. And that's poorly defined in nursing literature. And so I've used these terms more or less interchangeably. And that can bring a lack of clarity for further research that might focus on one or more of these terms in a specific way for the nursing profession. And so, yeah, this embodiment, as I've tried to describe, this idea of artistic reflection is that life's a journey, and with nature, it's intentional, and nurses are connecting again with ancient roots to face new challenges. And this idea of having this protective shield while also having one's heart open sustains efforts of nurses like yourselves to participate in a very challenging space. And this also can shield you against the consequences of inaction or lost hope. The idea of trees as arms is the proximity of seasonal trees, and how they represent power of nature to express itself through nurses who, in caring for the planet, sort of in a walking stance, are moving toward the challenge. And I would say in this way, our nurses, nurses are, nurtures resistance to anthropocentrism. And the Earth, as the head of the image, with the southern hemisphere pointed up, is trying to represent this idea of a global concern that was a priority amongst nurses, that we have to, in every effort, to mitigate the impacts of climate change for those who are most vulnerable to the affected levels of sea rise. And so this artistic reflection is attempting to merge themes and to use metaphor as story. And I refer to planetary health nursing not as a definition, but a reflection. And I see this as a feeling or a value that is expressed in the moment when nurses are connected with nature. And again, planetary health is not exclusive, right, to an endeavor to any specific group. We are looking for the potential to move these conversations throughout our profession to respond to planetary health challenges. And so just to finish up, there's a couple ways of reconnecting back to critical caring theory and seeing how these sub-themes are relevant. And these Caritas or curative health promotion processes are very similar to the Caritas processes of Jean Watson's work. And I'm not trying to express theory development here, but just sketch out how critical theory can support the disciplinary knowledge of participants in ways that indicate how planetary health work is the work of nursing. When we can start to use this as evidence to support the work that we do, that's the language of professional knowledge, and that needs to be utilized and effective and given to nurses, right? Once we see ourselves in this space, it is much more readily a sense of broadening the scope of one's practice. So there are some takeaways. I'm not going to list them all here other than to speak to them, but they're here. But to say that this includes how being connected with nature is an intentional journey for nurses to consider, one that requires us to unpack privilege and to move in practical ways towards sustainable lifestyles within communities that are socially and environmentally just. And this is leading from one's heart, where there are consequences to caring, the challenges in the service of those who suffer, and sort of seeing what needs to be done. A slow drip amongst individuals becomes a trickle, and then a stream which can affect change. And this is, the idea of nurses. If not us, then who? We're in a position to support these kinds of efforts. And so, just in terms of knowledge translation, I'm currently have a fellowship with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, and I'm also supporting the Caritas Coach Program through the Watson's Caring Science Institute to try to bring this idea of a focus on the health and well-being of nurses through a planetary health lens. And so taking this research and pulling back layers to really emphasize how can we protect and develop a perspective of health and well-being amongst nurses through a connection to planetary health. That's sort of the direction that I'm moving in right now, and reaching out to an organization such as Annie and Kane and ONIG here. These are opportunities I've had to present and to get feedback and to build on ideas where, again, which is right up what Annie does, right? You make toolkits and resources accessible, open source on the web. It is a phenomenal effort that you're doing here. I am so happy to have joined you. And, this idea of continuing research in this area is inspiring to me. I am, later stage career nurse, and I would love to see anyone interested in pursuing education or areas of practice that could be supported in this way. So just to conclude, I want to bring it back to the importance of art that was shared with me throughout this work. And this is a photo by Bluebird, as well as a poem that I really think highlights the efforts of nurses like yourselves. And Bluebird says, "A nurse for one, a nurse for all, human, animal, I hear their call. I see their pain, I see their tears, I hear their cries and feel their fears. The rhythm of life that we all know flows through the river, and as the wind blows, not separate at all, but all as one, connected together under the sun." And I think that just says it all for me. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to take your questions.
That was a great presentation, Steve. Really enjoyed learning about your dissertation work and in ethnography and all the ways that you approached collecting the data and making sense of it. A really nice organizational framework too that you laid out. So I'd just like to open it up. We've got about 12 more minutes to people who might have questions. You can unmute, or you can put your questions in the chat if you're feeling shy, or just go for it.
Well, I just want to say congratulations, Steve. I've gotten to know you over the past few years and was just so excited that you were doing research in the space and that you approached our group, and, to be a participant sort of through that and to see all these integrated perspectives and effort you've put into it. And I'm just so grateful I've gotten to see you sort of pull that out and put all those pieces there today. And I'm really excited about these other perspectives that you're taking, because I think that energy put into the next steps for us in terms of how we can activate and move forward is so important. So I'm just so excited and so encouraged. And I'm going to out myself. I'm Bluebird. And so it was a real pleasure to get to see that. So thank you for that. That really moves me, Steve. So I'm just so proud to be part of this. Thank you.
Well,
This is like a dissemination of results to participants, so that's pretty cool.
well, it is. Thank you so much, Jessica. It is really, you had such an impact on this work, and your influence is so important to me. So I really look forward to talking to you more and building on this, and seeing our next steps, and anyone else who's interested. That's the openness of collaborative practice I'm seeking.
Jessica Leclerc, you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks for a wonderful presentation. I'm sorry, my connection is terrible. My internet's out, so I'm using data on my phone right now. But I just wanted to share that I am blown away. I loved hearing about your dissertation. Seems like we had very similar dissertation topics. Last year, I also was doing my dissertation in the United States. I'm in Wisconsin. And my focus was on the climate justice perspectives, experiences, and strategies implemented by nurses and their community partners. And so I recognize some of your findings as being aligned with my findings. So I would love to talk with you more about that at a future time. And I have a question, and I'm sorry, I joined a little bit late, so you might have addressed this, but did you look at any comparisons between the settings of the nurses and their practice settings? So for example, nurses who had perspectives from community health versus hospital-based or academic or nonprofit settings, and if there was any differences in their experiences with planetary health or their activities or engagement, as you put it.
Thank you, Jessica, for your question and for your work that you're involved in. I really do look forward to speaking to you. One of the challenges of working in this space is that, 14 people seems, it is relatively few, but they are also identifiable in terms of the groups that I've been meeting with and working. So it was sort of advised from that sort of micro level, because of my population size being so small, that it really wouldn't be maybe as effective, or could be a risk to participants who are engaged. And so, what I would say is, I think there's more to be described in further research that would respect those differences. But what really stood out is where these nurses are engaged, they're creating communities of practice around them. They need to be nurtured. They need to be empowered and supported, because sometimes that's where the barriers are. It's like, oh, you're the tree hugger, oh, you're, and it's like, oh, isn't that nice? And it's kept as this still sort of this interest group mentality and framing. And the nurses are so tired of arguing like 5 years to get rid of styrofoam cups. Like, it's just not effective in some of these spaces. So going to regional, national levels, finding their voice within organizations such as Kane, like you don't need a PhD to participate. You need to have a community of practice and then be empowered to get involved. And if you want to pursue an education, go have at her. But we cannot exclude these spaces for people in academia. It's not effective. The writing is too somewhat inbred in terms of, ideas on top of each other, which are all great. I mean, how many environmental nursing frameworks can there be, right? That to me is a bit of a challenge, is to start to reinterpret nursing from a planetary health lens. Like that is important, but it needs to happen not just in education, but immediately in practice. So that's where, work that you're doing here, bringing people in, welcoming them, keeping it open source, and making it accessible. That's what's changing. And you'll see, I think you have noticed increased numbers as the conversations continue, as the dissonance of what's happening is getting, laid bare post-pandemic, right? We don't want to wait for the next thing. And so I'm happy to see the response, and people that have been in the space for a long time see those changes happening, and that gives me confidence because it might not be as prevalent, but the changes are moving from that drip to a trickle, and when the flow hits, hopefully we've got systems that can support it.
I wanted to just kind of build off of that question that Jessica made, because it seemed to me like when I never did hospital nursing, I was always community based, but the idea of being in an ICU or a NICU, or even when I visited my friends who are hospitalized, it's not very planetary focused, is it? I mean, you can barely look out a window, let alone feel fresh air, and I know some hospitals are building, courtyards or gardens but I mean, and it's hard to visualize a hospital that would be different than what it currently is, because you need to have certain level of hygiene and all that kind of stuff. But, I was just wondering if you were to interview nurses that worked in, operating rooms or ICUs, what their perceptions would be of their view of planetary health. And they're also seeing the most amount of waste disposed of in, just everything going into the bin left and right. So I just wonder if they have, a sense of distress about that, or not, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, it's that really emphasizes that struggle of wanting to live your life a certain way, and then your professional practice not enabling that to the extent to which you would like. One of the things that really stood out from several participants was this idea, and we're all, we're all, it's not just simple, to say it, but the idea that we are within nature, that it's not like, okay, I'm going to work and now I'm separate from nature. Even though there's not a window, even though there's not, we're looking at technology, it's all nature. So that perception that somehow we have to go somewhere else to reclaim our natural tendencies is something that is the duality of that is sort of the worldview that needs to be, deconstructed to some extent, and in that, I found that quite empowering, that in the midst of, we're doing this important work, and nurses are engaged in reforms of the windows and the style of the design, but really where these nurses are thriving is when they are outside of traditional nursing practice or traditional structures of employment, that they're working often unpaid labor to be involved in ways that they feel as a nurse they're prepared for. And so that redefining practice is stepping away from systems that aren't sustainable. And at some point, that conversation, whether it's, now or 50 years from now, is about preparing our communities for the reality that we cannot continue in ways that we've been doing. And either that will be forced upon us, or you'll hopefully have resources that can support your sustainable living in a very different way. And nurses aren't waiting for that. It's food security. It's understanding, basic security around, where they live and how they structure their family, and conversations of where those connections can be found, growing locally, trying to see what works in the soils that they live in. And yeah, just, also lowering the idea of what constitutes as joy. And that doesn't mean lowering the quality of your life or lowering your expectations, but, lowering but it's like, the appreciation of that bug on that nursing floor. It's all the chemicals that are trying to stop it. Like, good for it, right? Way to go. How do I get you outside or down the drain again? Right? That's what these nurses are thinking about. If there's a plant in the corner of the room, that helps draw their attention to connection. And these are magical little expressions of, what we like real nature. And in that space, that can be transformative, in the mind when you're dealing with the grind of the workday. I'm not sure if that's helping you, Lisa.
No,
But
that's excellent. I appreciate that a lot. I don't have that perspective because I've never worked in that environment, but it's a external, misperception, perhaps. But I know that we only have 1 minute left and we have Jessica's hand up, and I want to give Bluebird the last word. But before that, Steve, thank you so much. I look so forward to seeing where you go in the future and hope that we can all collaborate with you later in your success. Jessica.
Thank you so much. And it's so nice to be at home with all of these nurses with the similar hearts. And I was just going to say, that's a great, Lisa, and not everywhere has windows in the OR, but when I was a student nurse and I was in the OR scrubbed in for a C-section, it was twin boys being born, and it was scary because I was obviously just a brand new, not even technically a nurse yet. And I remember looking over and I saw my first double rainbow as we were, guiding these two little babies out. And so for me, I feel so entwined in connection with nature and with our lives. And so those are those moments, I like a glimmer there of that interconnectedness. And so unfortunately, not every OR has that, but those are those pieces and moments where I find so connected to humans is often intertwined with those nature moments. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And again, Steve, I'm so proud of the work and happy to celebrate you in any way we can and support that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. This is your work. Honestly, I've always said that. I am interpreting what these 14 nurses are doing and sharing. And if that is helpful, that's my goal. And it is open source. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in this area, the search strategies, the detail around how it's been organized is accessible. And I would encourage you to use it in ways that would be valuable.
Thank you so much. This was great. I really enjoyed it and look forward to your publications when they come out. Just send it, make sure that we get it copies, or then we can actually project it across our research working group. We send out lists of publications. That goes for everybody here. Let us know. Thank you very much. And next month, it'll be Wendy Bauer, who was with us today. And she'll be talking about fragrances and environmental chemicals that I think it's an occupational health talk more than our environmental talk. But anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Nice to meet you, Rachel. See you. Bye, Sarah. Wow, thanks a lot. I think that went